International Monetary Fund. What is International Monetary Fund?
The International Monetary Fund (IMF) is the central institution employing the international monetary system and promote balance, expansion of world trade, reduce trade restriction, stable exchange rates, minimal trade imbalance, avoidance of currency devaluations, and the correction of balance of payment problem. The IMF goal is to prevent and remedy international financial crises by encouraging countries to maintain sound economic policies. Because of its size, the IMF is also a forum for discussion of global economic policies. The IMF is headquartered in Washington, D.C., but has offices in Paris, Tokyo, New York, and Geneva.
Objective of International Monetary Fund.
First, promote international monetary cooperation, facilitate international trade, foster sustainable economic growth. Second, make resources available to members experiencing balance of payment difficulties. Lastly, the countries that joined the IMF between 1945 and 1971 agreed to keep their exchange rates secured at rates that could be adjusted only to correct a fundamental disequilibrium in the balance of payment and only with the IMF agreement.
IMF funds are helpful in many ways. There are certain areas where the IMF fails to address the member nations. The disadvantages of IMFs are discussed. Firstly, passive approach by IMF. The IMF has been passive in its approach and not been effective in promoting exchange stability and maintaining orderly exchange arrangement. This is considered as one of the major disadvantages of measure. Second is unsound policy for fixation of exchange rates. The usual policy for fixation of exchange rates is one of the disadvantages of IMF. Some of the provisions of IMF are unsound. For example, devaluation is justified when international inflation causes fundamental disequilibration. If it is non-removal of foreign exchange restriction by IMF, one of the important objectives of IMF has been removed foreign exchange restriction which retard the growth of global trade. Still, member countries follow unhealthy practices of exchange control and multiply exchange rates. Consequently, the international business is adversely affected. Fourth, inadequate resources. Resources at the disposal of the International Monetary Fund are not adequate to cater to the needs of member countries, which is a setback of IMF. Uncertain capital inflows into the international financial system necessitate the strengthening of the fund resources. The interest rate by International Monetary Fund, high interest rate charged on its advances are considered one of the major disadvantages of IMF. So the debt servicing for the less developed countries is difficult. For example, since 1982, the interest charge for loans out of the ordinary resources of the fund is 6.6%. Stringent condition by IMF. The stringent condition imposed by IMF on its member nation are one of the big disadvantages of IMF. The IMF is criticized for its strict conditional clauses while extending credit to member countries. Seven disadvantage: failure to play an effective role in international monetary matters. Is that it has failed to play an effective role in international monetary matters. For example, it does not provide facility for short-term credit arrangement. This has led to the swap arrangement among the central bank of failure to tackle East Asian currency crisis is one of the disadvantages of IMF. The failure to tackle East Asian currency crisis is considered one of the disadvantages of IMF. In July 1997, the occurrence of the East Asian currency crisis affected East Asian countries like Thailand, Malaysia, Philippines. Last but not least, domination by rich countries is one of the disadvantages of IMF. The domination by rich countries is another major disadvantage of IMF. With economies around the world on the verge of collapsing, some are pointing to the IMF as a potential savior of the world economy.